Hello again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video I want to talk a bit about playing lead lines and solos. Before we get started, a couple of things to bear in mind. I've said it a few times in previous videos that you can't teach creativity. You know, the creative process it's not that like a scientific thing, it's more of an art. And it's not something I can teach a formula for. And also, there's no right way or wrong way to structure a solo or to approach the sort of material we're going to be talking about in this video. Really, all I'm going to kind of cover in this video is just a few ideas to help you think about what you could put into your solos and how you could play more effectively. So as a starting point, let's kind of go back to basics and think about what the three fundamental parts of music are. We've got melody, harmony, and rhythm. So melody is like if you like, the linear flow of the notes as you go from one note to another. How you move between them, so the idea of like the melodic intervals. Harmony is kind of what gives you the sound of the key, the chordal tones, how the notes of the chords relate to each other and give you the sound of the harmonic structure. And then there's also rhythm, you know, the pace, the tempo, if you like, look much more like the feel of the piece in terms of timing. And if you think about how those three concepts apply to playing a solo, you might think, well, it's all about like melody, isn't it? Because it's about playing a lead melody over some chords, over some percussion. So the rhythm guitar's providing the harmony and a bit of the rhythm, the percussion's providing the rhythmic aspect, you're providing the solo line, the melody. Well, you are, but you also need to think about the harmonic aspects and the rhythmic aspects. You think about the harmonic aspects, how the notes that you play fit harmonically alongside everything else, and rhythmically just the timing of it, the feel of it, how the pace and the phrasing of the melodies that you play fit in with the overall piece. So to say, the three things to bear in mind, it's not just about the notes of the lead lines, how everything relates together as part of a piece. So before embarking on playing a solo, we need to know, well, what notes have we got available to us? Thinking about that example at the start of the video, I was playing something in a minor key. I think it was the key B minor, and there I had a couple of like top level scale options. I've got B minor pentatonic, or I've got B natural minor. There's quite a strong relationship between pentatonic scales and major and minor scales. I've done a separate video about that, which I'll put a link in the information section for that if you want to check that out. But yeah, my main scale options there were the minor pentatonic and the natural minor. Minor pentatonic. Quite like the sound of that. It's quite, sometimes it's hard to think of words to describe music. Quite an open sound. It got a slightly bluesy sort of feel. If I wanted to add in a flat fifth degree and make that into a minor blues scale, do that, but as like I said, it's got quite an open sound. The other scale option that I had there was the natural minor, and that's bringing out the sound of the natural minor. It's a little bit more complex. It's basically got the same notes as the minor pentatonic, but it's got a second degree in there. It's got a flat sixth degree in there. And I think that sounds a little bit more richer. Again, sometimes it's difficult to find the right words to describe music, but I guess focused, if you like, is maybe a better word to use for that. If you're not particularly familiar with a scale or where the notes of it are on the fingerboard, then that's where a tool like PhatPhish can help you dial in the scale that you're interested in. It'll show you where the notes are on the fingerboard. So I've got those as my main scale options: the natural minor or the minor pentatonic or the minor blues. If I wanted, I could bring in non-diatonic notes. So those scales there are generally diatonic, apart from that flat fifth degree in the minor blues scale. But I could bring in notes that just don't belong to the key at all. They would sound a bit wrong. They would introduce tension. And that's a really useful place to start talking about how we structure solos. When we talk about tension, it means something that it doesn't sound happy, it doesn't sound resolved, it kind of wants to go on somewhere. And then release is the opposite of that, it's settled. And a solo is the balance between tension and release. If you play with just there's lots of outside notes and you use strange phrasing or whatever, it's going to sound tense all the time. Now that might be fun to begin with, but the listener's going to start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. They're not in a happy place ever, and they'll get restless and they'll probably get uncomfortable listening to that and they'll want to move away. Conversely, if you just play safe notes all the time, you just play everything very settled, very consonant, very relaxed, very like all about release and no tension, then it just gets boring. There's nothing to challenge the listener. The listener's going to get bored. They'll not feel uncomfortable and want to move away because of discomfort. They'll want to move away from listening to you just because you're not stimulating them. So the whole thing about a well-paced solo, well-structured solo is having that balance between tension and release, making the listener want something and then kind of giving them the reward for listening to you, if you like. So one way that I like to approach this is having a phrase with a long sustained note at the end, and then which note I use as the sustained note and how that relates to the underlying chord, to give you that element of tension or release. Okay, so to show you what I mean, I'll just quickly play a chord into the looper and then play over the top of that, and you'll see what I mean. Yeah, so you heard a little phrase there, and each time I ended on a different note. Sometimes I was finishing on fairly strong chord tones, other times less strong chord tones. Sometimes I was playing like a second degree or a flat seventh, maybe not as resolved, and the phrase still kind of came to a natural conclusion, but it didn't feel totally settled. It's like it wanted to move on somewhere else. And then other times I finished on maybe like a fifth degree, which is a good strong chord tone, not super resolved though, still kind of wants to go somewhere. So give it a little bit of release, but not like complete. And then other times it's landing on the first degree, on the root note of the chord, and that just sounds completely settled. So that's a good way to finish the phrase. So sometimes I was finishing on less strong chord tones, a little bit of tension, finishing on stronger chord tones, and there's a bit more release. So you kind of got the balance there between a phrase that felt like it wanted to go on somewhere, so it was obvious this wasn't the end of the line, the melody was going to go a little bit further, but you're kind of exploring the tension between the lead line and the underlying chords. And there's other ways you can bring in tension and balance it with release in your lead lines. For example, you could consider using double stops, two notes at once in your lead line. So rather than just having a single note in your melody and how that interacts with the underlying chords, you could play. So I've got a little bit of tension there. Not a very relaxed interval. And and then settling on a single root note, a tonic note that brings the resolution. So that's something else you could consider. And you can use pacing and speed to give you the ideas of tension and release. So you could play like a slow phrase, land that somewhere where it needs to go on, and then finish it with a bit of a flourish. Something like that, just an idea. And you could, something else which you hear a lot in blues is a repeated phrases. Playing a phrase over and over and over, just to the point where the listener's starting to get bored with it, and then taking the lick somewhere. Something like that. So just a few ideas there, but just to kind of get over the basic premise about solo is not just a meandering series of notes. It has some structure to it, and the idea of tension and release is a really, really important thing in solo structure. Something people often use as an analogy to like a lead line is something with a plot, something like a story or a film or something like that. And how you would structure a lead line, or how you would structure, say, the plot for a movie. Now, I'm recording this just after Christmas, so as an example, let's go with a really popular Christmas movie that I'm sure you've seen, Die Hard. So Die Hard, if you think about how that's structured, it starts off with the opening scenes, people go into a Christmas party, it's all fairly settled, it's just kind of getting you some establishing shots, making you understand what the context is, nothing too challenging. Then the terrorists come out, there's peril, there's tension. Then the next scene you've got, John McClane's still in the building, he could save the day, so that kind of offsets the tension and gives you a little bit of release. And then the next few scenes, it's like swinging backwards and forwards as terrorists have the upper hand, or John McClane has the upper hand, and you've got this kind of balance, like I say, between tension and release, and it builds up to some sort of climax where you've got that big, the big final scene, and then the final release where as Bruce Willis lets Alan Rickman go through the window. So almost what you could think about is your solo, you're structuring it the way that you would a plot. It's setting the scene with some basic phrases, building on those, taking it somewhere, adding a little bit of tension, bringing in a little bit of release, and then building it up to some sort of climax. And basically what you're looking for is the musical equivalent of Yippee-Ki-Yay, Mother. And you've got that overall, if you like, story arc. So you've got the individual scenes within the movie and how they relate to each other. But what's the overall story arc? And there's various ways you can structure a solo. Particularly if it's like a longer form solo. Do you start off with it's kind of down the lower end of the neck, playing the lower notes of the lower register of the scale, and then build it up to something at a higher pitch where you're building up to the upper octaves. You could use speed. Start off with relatively slow phrases, and then as the solo progresses, you start to, rather than just playing quarter notes, you're playing you're playing eighth notes, 16th, 32nd notes, and playing phrases with faster notes in. It's not about just out and out shredding. You've still got to have structure, and that, like I say, the idea of phrases that bring a certain amount of tension or a certain amount of release or whatever. But you can build up like pitch or speed or pace or whatever, and that kind of is the overall arc, the overall story arc, if you like, away your solo's going. If you want a really, really good example of this, listen to Blues for Hollywood by Frank Gambale. I can't play it in this video because I'll get copyright strikes off YouTube, and it's all rubbish. The way YouTube threatens to take videos down if you play other people's music. It's really hard for creatives like me. So even just for music education, I run the risk of copyright strikes. So go and find Blues for Hollywood by Frank Gambale and have a listen to that. The solo is a textbook where it's structured. It starts off, it kind of builds on the like the verses and melodies, if you like. It's an instrumental piece, but it starts off with like instrumental verses and choruses, if you see what I mean. Takes those ideas, builds them into the solo, and then as the solo goes on, it's a fairly long form solo, it gets more intense, moves up to the higher registers, the pace really increases, and it kind of comes to more like a climactic end. Excellently structured solo, one that's well worth checking out. In terms of playing your lead lines, think about how you move from one note to the other. The melodic intervals as you go up through a phrase. Are you just going fairly gradually, just moving up through adjacent notes or maybe alternate notes in the scale? Which is quite a smooth transition between notes. Or are you going for bigger type of intervals, which kind of really drive the piece forward if you're moving up like octaves or something like that. Again, there's no right way or wrong way to move through notes. It's just, well, what feel are you going for? What does that melody sound like? Does it sound like it's just moving gradually and it's just leading the listener through, or are you really driving the listener forward by having some big melodic intervals in there? Also, how do you move between the notes? Are you just going from one note to the other, picking one note, or are you playing something more legato? You're using something smooth like string bending, hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, sweep picking? Or do you want something that's a little bit more staccato, possibly muting the strings slightly to give you a bit more attack? It all adds kind of to the voice of the piece and the feel of the solo. Something which I probably should have mentioned a bit earlier actually is the idea of a theme. The idea of, rather than just going in with just some notes, having an idea in your head as to, well, what's the, like, if you're like a motif, something like a phrase or something that you might include in the solo, and you keep coming back to that in some sort of variation. It could be just a simple 2 or 3 note phrase, but you could use that, introduce that really simplistically earlier on, and then have variations on that, playing it slightly differently. So, it's a really simple way to start a blues solo. So you could use that to start off like phrases early on in the solo. And then later on, there's other ways of just playing that phrase, but it becomes a bit of a motif that you can pepper into different phrases that you play throughout the solo, and hopefully you can kind of, if you have a suitably interesting phrase, you can make that more complex, you can build on it and grow it. And then if you think about how that sounds at the start of the solo and how it starts at the end, you've got a natural progression. It's part of like your, saying your story arc of how the solo goes. It's not just about taking the listener on a journey from some slow low notes to some fast high notes, but you've got like a motif, and you can hear that evolving as you go through, and end up with something much more complex and fully formed than perhaps you started the solo with. Less is more is a phrase that you sometimes hear bandied around, and it's very true, particularly with the idea of a guitar solo. No, it's not just about the notes that you play, it's the gaps between them. It's about giving the lead lines space to breathe and allowing the underlying chords to kind of come through in places. If you just shred constantly over the top, there's a constant barrage of notes, it's difficult to have any sort of structure to what you're doing, because it's like I say, it's just this wall of notes. You're taking your foot off the gas now and again and giving the notes space to breathe is really, really important. It's a bit of a cliche, less is more. But I would much rather hear just one or two really well placed, well selected, well phrased notes over a chord progression, rather than just every possible note just shredded away. The idea behind a solo is to give the listener an experience that they enjoy. It's not, and I can't stress this enough, it's not an opportunity for you to show off and demonstrate how fast you can play or how complex a run you can play. That's just showing off. The purpose of playing music is to give the listener an experience. This is something that put me off quite a lot of like shred guitar and stuff, because people, particularly on YouTube, sort of fell into the habit and the pattern of making videos just showing what they could do. And I just got really unimpressed. I mean, technically, I'm impressed with what somebody can do in terms of how fast they can play, but it doesn't move me in terms of what I'm hearing, because I'm just hearing like an exercise almost and how fast you can play. Remember, the point of the solo is to convey an idea, to convey some feeling, some emotion. You know, if I had some time to work on my guitar and it was like, okay, I can spend half an hour practicing technically to play faster and more complex runs, or I can spend half an hour to play better with what I've got and have something that's more emotionally valid, if you like, something that's convey more feeling. I'll always go for the latter, because I want to be able to play something that someone's going to be able to engage with, rather than just kind of have somebody sit there thinking, well, I'm not really excited by what you're doing. Yeah, you can play fast, or well, yeah, you can shred and you know lots of notes, but what's it saying musically? So yeah, less is more. Give whatever it is you play, use speed, you know, as like I said before, as a means of, you know, pacing the solo and getting the structure there. But it's not all about speed. Give the notes time to breathe. As guitar players, we love talking about gear, and it's something I often find myself talking to people about. Is like, yes, I have an interesting looking guitar, you probably want to know what it is. Yes, I've got a board full of pedals down here, you probably want to know what they are and what amplifier I'm using and so on. It's fun to talk about gear, but remember, all of this gear, the point of it is to play music. So, you know, don't lose sight of the objective is the music, the melody, the solo over those chords. But there is a gear aspect to think about with your solos. As well, what gear do you select? If you've got a variety of guitars at your disposal, or even only one guitar and a few pedals or whatever, how you use that to best suit the lines that you're playing. Now that piece that I was playing at the start is quite minor key. It was quite somber. It was, you know, bluesy sort of feel. I wanted something that sounded a little bit mournful, a little bit lonely. So if you listen, there was a lot of delay on there. There's an echo effect. I certainly wasn't shy about adding reverb in there, so it gives it a big feeling of space. The guitar felt a little bit more kind of like a voice just echoing out in an empty space. A little bit of overdrive there to give me some sustain. I didn't want something super clean. And think about, you know, when you come to play your solos, what sort of voice do you want the solo to have? It could even be something as simple as, well, which pickup do you use for a particular phrase? If you really want to dig in, you might want to go to the bridge pickup, something a little bit more trebly. If it's something a bit more legato, maybe go to the neck pickup where it sounds a bit more rounded or a bit smoother. You know, roll off the tone control to give you something a little bit softer. There's all these different things you can do, and think about how the voice of your guitar and the choice of pedals and amp settings and so on complements what it is that you're trying to play. If you want a particular feeling, if you want something like I had in that example there, where I wanted something that sounded quite lonely, if you like, use of reverb and delay is a good means for that, is an example. To extend that movie analogy even more, you could think about the idea of who the actors were in that piece. You know, in Die Hard, you had Bruce Willis, you had Alan Rickman. They played the part, they delivered the lines from the scriptwriter, they followed the direction of the director and gave you the finished piece. Now you could have the same script, same direction, same set, same everything, but with different actors, but they would bring their own delivery to it and you would end up with a different experience. Alan Rickman is an awesome actor. He plays baddies really, really well because just the way he plays, like his, his voice, his delivery. I can't imagine Hans Gruber played by Jim Carrey. Well, I can, but it's a completely different Die Hard, even though he might be reciting the same script and taking the same stage directions. And so it is with the guitar. If I played that solo that I did at the start, but instead of using the Strat, which has got quite an open sounding pickup, I played something like my Les Paul, which has got a fatter sounding humbucking pickup, and maybe I played something clean and I didn't have that delay and reverb and had a different voice, it would be a completely different sounding solo. So that's something else to bear in mind. What equipment are you using and how does that fit in? Right, I've talked an awful lot here, but there's a lot more to a lead line than just playing notes from a scale over the top of some chords, and hopefully that's giving you some things to think about. So the next thing really you have to do is go away and practice. Play some chords into a looper, record something, get a backing track, whatever. Think about what you're doing. The stuff I was playing there, so much of the stuff I play is improvised, and I'm doing a lot of this thinking on the fly. If you're not as experienced in playing, you may not be able to just improvise like that. You might want to plan things out in advance. That's cool. Plenty of guitarists play pre-prepared or semi-prepared lead lines. There's nothing wrong with that. But the important thing is to take these ideas, do something with them, and then listen back to what you're doing. And think about what were you doing right, what were you doing wrong, and how can you evolve those ideas. If you don't have the mental capacity to do all of this thinking and playing and analysis on the fly, well, record what you're doing. You just set up your phone camera or whatever, just record the audio or whatever. Listen to what you're doing and then analyze it after the event. And listen to other guitar players or just other solo instruments. It doesn't have to be guitar. Any instrument that plays a lead melody. Saxophone, quite like blues and jazz styles of music. Saxophone is got quite a lot of similarities to the way it approaches a solo to how a guitar would. Listen to other players and think about what are they doing. If you hear something that sounds really good, why does that work? Think about what you're hearing that works and why is that, and think about taking those ideas and incorporating them into your own solos. How do you emulate what other people are doing? It's practice. It's as I say, I said at the start, I can't teach the creative process. There's no right way, there's no wrong way to do this. But as you practice, you start to develop that, and some things will become second nature. You've just got to persevere. Okay, that's all for now. As ever, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see other videos that are posted on the channel, then please click subscribe, which is also down there somewhere, and click that bell icon, because that way you get notified of other content that I upload onto the channel. You're welcome to leave a comment, but YouTube doesn't always notify me when people comment on videos. So if there's something specific you want to ask me, whether it's about guitar playing, music theory, guitar gear, anything at all, you're better off going here. Fill that form in, send your question in, that way it comes direct to me and I can get around to answering it in a future video. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching. Go away, practice your guitar, play some lead lines, and yippee-ki-yay, mother.